And so I only started this the beginning of my sophomore year. At the end of my sophomore year,
Come closer, we can record you.
Yeah. At the end of my sophomore year, I had an internship, and I was working with a drone manufacturing company, and they just needed to get their 3D scanned model from SolidWorks into a game engine, and I just happened to know it, so that's what I did my internship on, and since then I've just been doing it obsessively. Over the last year, I've been working on texturing and materials, which is what I'm going to talk about today, using a program called Substance Painter. Have you guys heard of that one too? So Substance Painter, I'll be able to show you some pictures. I can't get it running on this computer, but it's basically Photoshop in 3D. So it's awesome. If you guys like Photoshop, it's like super intuitive to get you going on the other stuff. Oh, what did I hit? Okay. How do you skip?
You're in probably QuickTime right now.
I don't.
There you are.
I don't know how to do this.
Yep,
Sorry.
powered now.
Technology, right? Okay. So I'm going to talk about three things today. The first is UV unwrapping, which is actually, by the sounds of it, one of the last things you guys will do. And then texture painting, and then materials. And I debated a long time over what order I was going to do this in, but I think this is the best way to go about it. So hopefully we'll go through with that.
No, I should explain that he mentioned a software, but everything he is talking about right now applies to many different software. Applies to Maya, applies to Blender, applies to Substance Painter. So he's just, giving you a nice general view of what materials are in all these software.
Yeah, basically everything I talk about today is a general ideas that they apply to everything. So everything that you can do in one program, you could do in the next. And if you learn it just as general ideas at first, it's going to help you when you're trying to work between programs and work with other people. So first, what is a UV map? I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but basically I've got this box here, just like the simplest thing you can have, and I've got designs everywhere. And it's a little dim on here, but you see we've got this cross pattern, right? And so we've got 6 squares in there, and those squares are actually representing each face that we have. So what a UV map is it's basically a program's way of taking all of the points and all the faces and all the edges on a 3D object and making it 2D. Basically giving it, so it's like origami in reverse. You're basically unwrapping a model. That's why it's called UV unwrapping. So I'm going to go really quickly over the basics of how we do it, because you guys are going to probably go into it more in depth, but basically the steps are making seams and hitting unwrap. The challenge is, where do you make the seams? So starting with the box, really easy stuff. These red lines are where I made my seams when I was unwrapping this box. It was just here, 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 and then going all the way around so you can have that long tail unwrap, right? So when I started to unwrap it, this isn't what it actually looks like. This is just a model to resemble what it looks like, but it starts to unwrap, kind of like how you see the red. It's unwrapping into that cross shape right there, right? So basically what this does is it allows us to texture paint. It allows us to do pictures. So what you're seeing here is the checkers. That is like something you'll see on a bunch of models. It's basically their way of saying, here's how the flow of the 3D model flows with the 2D model. So I've taken a 2D image that's just checkers and applied it to this UV map. So the square was pretty easy, or the box was pretty easy. Where it gets complicated, and what I was going to talk about today mostly, was stuff like this. So sometimes it gets a little more difficult. This is 23,000 triangles for this model. And I actually did unwrap this manually. I didn't use anything automatic. And so there's my proof right there that you can do it. Because this didn't take me that long. This probably took me 20 minutes to unwrap and set up, and that's including going with all the UVs and stuff.
He hinted something, though, very important. That is that you do also have some automated ways to do it.
Yeah, and I'll go over those later, too. Everything is technically automated. It's just how automated you do it. So this was me manually cutting seams at sharp edges. And if you can see from the model, I don't know if it's a little hard to see. There's a bigger picture later. But it is a lot of loose parts, so that does make it easier. And basically what we get is the really complicated version of our unwrapped cube. So one of the terms that I'm going to probably be using a lot, that I just want to show right off the bat before I forget, is a UV island, or I think in Maya it's called a shell. That's, say, this right here. It's a separate piece that's cut off. So if we wanted to think of our cube in a more complicated way, rather than trying to keep it as one solid piece, say we cut every single edge, we would get 6 individual squares out of that, right? Those would be 6 UV islands. So
Or shell and
or
line.
shells, sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
shells. If we went back to the original UV unwrap that was the cross shape, that would just be one shell, right? So we're going to talk about the importance of balancing those and figuring out how much to do of each. But basically, the goal of a shell is, if you're going to manually unwrap it, in one sense, one of the goals is for you to kind of get an idea of the shape of the object. So you see this loop here that I made? That's actually just this piece, this half. I basically cut it in half down the center, and we have those two shells here. So I'm going to have a lot more to talk about. It's going to make more sense as I go on.
We will do it.
Yeah,
We will
yeah.
do it
So
not Thursday, but Tuesday. So it'll be fine as long as I have an understanding of the concept.
yeah, so the key thing to take away from this, though, is now we could take any picture. We could take a picture of a dog, let's say, and put it on here, and every face on my model is going to apply to some part of that dog. Let's say the dog's nose is right here. That means in the 3D image, you're going to see a dog nose right there, right? So that's our goal, because everything that you see that's painted in any animation or game is a 2D image wrapped around a 3D image. So why we want this? Because have you guys tried to do the hyper shaders in Maya, or applying materials at all? Not yet.
I was going to do it today, and you would come.
Yeah. So that's what I had started with, and it's basically the idea of taking a solid object and just applying one general thing, saying it's metal, saying it's plastic, whatever. You can model that way, but why we want to do UV and texturing is computation time, first of all, and work time. So adding small details. So if I go back really quick to this highlighted area, let's look at like this part right here. This is just a few squares, and if you look at it on here, it's just a couple rows of squares that's going around. That's it. But if I go to my model, you can see there's a plastic piece taped on here with screws drilled in, and they've got reflection and all that. So UV texturing allows us to actually paint on an image, and we can paint details. And so there's two fronts to that. There's things that are not just solid colors, like wood, or like if you can see, I don't know if it's a little far away, there's like the textured paint, kind of it's all rough and all that kind of stuff. So it allows us to take images. We could actually import images. So you can go outside, you could take a picture of dirt, and then you could pull a plane into your scene and unwrap it and just tape that picture of dirt onto it, basically. And there you go, you have dirt. And then you could do a few other things that we'll talk about to make it look more like dirt. But so you could basically do things that are not a solid uniform color. And second is add details. So like I showed those screws, I didn't have to break up the geometry. I didn't have to add on that plastic piece physically, and I didn't have to like model a screw and put it in. And that's really important because it keeps your guys' models clean so that you can see the flow of the shapes and all that kind of stuff.
Less polys.
Less
right?
polys, yeah.
That's really key.
Low poly is a really important one. So I said I did that project for my internship, and when they gave it to me, I think it was like 1 million tries, and I brought it down to like 20,000 something. So when you think in computation times, like that's really heavy, because when you're rendering, you're doing an animation, and it's one frame at a time, 24 frames a second, and it takes 30, 50 minutes to render a frame. You want to keep it low poly. And that also actually resolution does apply. So the resolution of this wood, the bigger the resolution is, the more detailed it is, the more it's going to take. But it is a lot nicer than actually doing the mesh, because it's less light to bounce off and all that kind of stuff.
Less computation.
Yeah, yeah. So the biggest struggle that I had going with UVs is looking at an object and going, how the heck do I UV unwrap this? Like a lot of you guys are working with like people and stuff, and you have like your rocket ships and all that kind of stuff. It's a balance, and it has to do with shells.
Or islands, yeah.
Yeah, shells, islands.
It's the same thing.
I learned the term shells today because I'm up there. Yeah. So, and basically you have two different ends of the spectrum. There is our cross that we went over in the beginning, right? That's one shell. That is one solid object. It turned out perfectly because I just painted it because it's a simple box. When it gets to a person, it's going to have a lot of distortion. And I will go more over that in the next slide. The other option is if you were to like separate every single piece, every single individual face with its own shell, which would be really easy. You wouldn't have any distortion, and you could just say, hey, cut everything, and it'll do it. But you'll end up with seams. So this is a zoomed-in picture of the model that I had before. And I had actually placed a seam here, because I had a lot of seams all around it, and you can see the textures don't add up because you have this even checkered image, and if there's two different shells on two different things that their edges are supposed to be connected in the 3D model, if they're going off in another direction, they're not going to line up, right?
And the seams are the edges of the islands
Yeah.
or shells, whatever you want to call it.
So the seams are these guys, the red lines. So I only have, so like here's a seam. This actually isn't a seam. So it's only the red lines. I know it's probably hard to see back there. So if it's not a seam, it's going to fold along that line. That's where the folds happen. So you can see right there how it's folding about this, or like these are not seams. These are just edges that are on seams. What's up? Yeah, but I know in the second picture I have red to show all the edges, but yeah, in the first image, red is where you cut, and the rest of the edges, the program will do, and it does this automatically. You're not manually folding it. I only just did that for the sake of the presentation, but it just basically unwraps it as best it can. And there's some shapes that get more complicated that don't perfectly unwrap flat, which is where the distortion comes in.
So those red lines, those seams can get tricky. Let's say
Yeah,
tricky.
well, luckily that's where most of my UV talk is on. So really quick, I want to talk about distortion. So you can see the seam here. This is where I made a cut, and because of that, it made two different shells. The faces that are going here were in a different spot on the image than the faces going here, and they didn't line up. You can work your way around it some ways. The other end is if I didn't cut these up, and can you guys see that? Is that a little too small? It's a little bit. So I made my own brick texture, just on like paint or something, and I just wrapped it around a sphere. But think of a way that you could cut a sphere such that it would perfectly come out flat. You can't, right? I mean, especially if it's a perfect sphere, it's gonna be impossible to flatten it out perfectly. So because of that, the bricks got distorted when I was like building around, and it's like big at one end and small at the other, and it's like really obvious to your viewer. So basically, your goal when you're UV unwrapping is not just to unwrap it in such a way that it's flat, but how are we going to find a balance? How are we going to make it not distorted and not obviously seamed everywhere? Here's a real world example, literally real world. So have you guys seen all the crazy map projections that they've done? Most of you probably know just like the square map or like the elliptical map or something. That is an example of a bad UV unwrap. Basically, I forget the countries, but it's like it'll show some countries as like twice as big as another country, when really they're like a third of the size, stuff like that. So that's how we get distortion. So here's the two ends of the spectrum. There's stuff like this one, which has a lot of distortion because it's trying to be simple, or there's something like this monstrosity that's just cut in a bunch of ways. And yeah, it's going to show a little distortion, but are you going to really be able to paint on that? It's difficult. So luckily, there's some tricks. So the rule of thumb that I go by is that you can hide seams more than you can hide distortions. Which I know you guys are doing. Are a lot of you guys mostly doing organic stuff like people? Is that
No,
more or
not
less?
necessarily. Kind of, they're working with a group that does video games, so some of them need like aliens, but
Yeah.
some they need just tanks or airplanes
Yeah.
or ships. Now, one thing I
Okay.
want to highlight is that seams can be hidden, distortion cannot. That means do not be afraid of cutting.
Yeah.
Remember we said that you can do those cuts, and those kind of, you end up having seams. But if you don't do the cut, you end up having distortion. I feel like you don't be afraid of cutting, of making those cuts, and you understand how to make the cuts next cuts.
Yeah, there's ways to also get around seams too, with like texture tiling and stuff like that. Also, depending on how you're painting, you could just paint right over the seams and never notice. Anyway, so if you're working on organic, especially because of all the curves, you do have to worry about distortion. So feel free to make cuts. So 3 of the places that are good to make seams is a material change. And so I'm going to use like a person as an example, because it's like the easiest thing, because like a lot of you guys are doing it, and that's like the hardest thing to UV unwrap with distortion. Where's there a material change? Say your shirt to your skin, right? If you have like a jacket especially that comes out where the edge is folded over, that right there is a perfect place to cut. Or I think so, as an example that you guys can actually see. So I have this guy right here, right? This is a wood texture, this is a metal texture. That's just one solid mesh going around, like it's a few faces. And I was like, well shoot, I have to, if it's like a circle, I have to unwrap somewhere so that I can unwrap flat. Where's the perfect place to do it? Right where the metal meets the wood, right? You guys aren't going to see that seam. Does that make sense? Am I going a little fast?
Maybe if
Anyone?
it's just a general
Yeah.
understanding. Do you guys have questions? Do you guys get it?
Yeah,
The idea
feel
of
free to
unwrapping
stop
and
me.
cutting, and so you have seams, but you don't have major distortions. Do you have a question? Yes.
So we're just talking about unwrapping the object, right?
Yeah,
That means
right. Yeah, no
opening-
color is involved yet. So
We're just talking about having a mesh that you flatten up, you open up, just like you showed the earth, you can flatten in many different ways. And then certain, depending on how well you cut, it will end up differently. And he's saying, do not be afraid to cut, especially if it is a change of material, because that will hide the seam. You will get it more when we sit down and do it, but I feel like it's important that you have this introduction so that you know what you're doing when we're there doing the hands-on part.
yeah, you could really only learn this from practice, like as far as like really getting it.
But you have to
But
understand before
yeah,
you practice.
yeah, like it'll only click once you start to do it on your model. And you start thinking about like, oh, well, this is a good place to cut. So as far as like what you're saying, yeah, we're just worrying about the UV maps right now. But when I say like material change, I'm not saying you have to have it painted to know where you're gonna unwrap it. I'm saying like if you can kind of think about what you're looking for, like, oh, I'm probably gonna put like maybe a panel here, like a door to open up. You can cut that out and feel safe doing it. Another place is hidden geometry. So anywhere where there's a line that like, say that your tongue, let's say your character has like an actual mouth, the back of your tongue going around there, you can cut there because nobody's going to be looking inside there, and that lets you put the tongue somewhere else to deal with, another time. Seams in your shirt going on your armpit that they're not going to be looking at. So I'll have actually an example that I can just show you. So what I mean by that is like, I have these posts, right? A post is just a cylinder with a square shape. And so that means that I have to cut off the ends, and I have to cut somewhere along one of the vertical lines of this post so that I can unwrap. Is that like pretty easy to picture? Just a flat post? So I'm like, well, where should I cut this? Because it's pretty round. There's no special like material change or anything. It was just the back line, the line that was behind the camera that you can't see. It's a little trickier if it's like a video game where you can walk around the whole post. So actually, if any of you guys play video games, you should go do that and like go look at the maps, and you can actually see some seams where there's like it can be avoided. It's actually interesting. And then here I have a material change. So I drew a bark material, and then I drew like the cross section of the wood, and so it's a perfect place to cut around these. Is all these spots and stuff. It goes on and on. So there's like hidden geometry. So like these are separate walls that are just cubes that are put into posts, right? So they kind of intersect. Well, all those intersecting faces, like the part of this wall that's actually inside this post, you can cut that all up because it's not going to matter, and that's going to make you be able to pull out a flat image easier. I think for a specific example of this wall, what I did is that wall is a cube, it's not a flat image. This is made from like a bunch of individual parts. And what I did was the face of the wall that you guys are going to see, I cut that out separately so that I could put it in its spot and say like, this is going to be just a square that I could easily see on the UV unwrap and put the bricks on. And then the rest of it might get a little distorted if I don't cut it right and stuff like that, but that's okay, because it's hidden. You can't see it. It's inside, right? So for when it gets too complicated, this is one of the last models I made. It has 52,000 edges, and it's got probably 40 or 50 individual parts to it, and it's like, you could unwrap it if you wanted. It'd probably take like an hour. It wouldn't be the end of the world. But sometimes
He's talking an hour because he knows how to do it. If you guys try to unwrap this, it might take you more like
it's
7 hours.
It's like a thing that you put in music and you just kind of sit there and like methodically go around it. But anyways, you can see this, like you can't even see the lines, like it's super ugly. That's because I didn't unwrap that. I was like, no way, I want to paint this already. So I just automatically unwrapped it. So that is a solution. I know Maya has it. I know Blender has it.
What it means is there's a button you can push that says, hey Maya, please unwrap it for me.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
So the difference is when you draw seams and then you hit unwrap, it still automatically unfolds it. But if it's auto unwrapping, it draws all your seams for you. And there's a couple different ways how it could do it. It could say like, okay, well, as the angle gets sharper and sharper, there's a certain threshold, and anything that's sharper than this, that's where we're gonna make the cuts. Or there's like some that go in like shape or where it's facing. I usually just use the default ones. And then there's like usually a couple parameters you could edit if you want. So like what angle does it cut at and stuff. But
Maya
it depends.
chooses where to cut.
Yeah, it does choose. So there's upsides and downsides. Upsides, time, right? And it's easy for you to just click. And if you guys are, rushed on your projects and you really just want to get a painting out there, then that's fine. It works really well for mechanical stuff. So she's saying like, you guys did rocket ships and tanks, stuff like that. Works really well. For organic models, you might want to go more towards the manual unwrapping, but usually, especially with what like some of the organic models you guys are doing, it should be pretty simple just to find like, okay, I'm going to cut a line down the back, and if they have a backpack hiding it, that's okay, right? And then that's how you unwrap your torso, right? So it depends. You will always have control though. So whether you manually unwrap it or cut it, you're going to be able to then take the basically the UV map and you could move the shells around and rotate them and push them around. So an example that I like to use is like, say you have a circle on a part and then you have another ring of faces around it and you cut those separately. When no matter how you unwrap it, it's going to unwrap the circle over here and the ring separately. Well, that's super inefficient, right? Because you can put the circle inside the ring and save yourself some space. So you're going to have to like manually push stuff around. I think there's a kind of example on, I guess it's a little far back. So like kind of an example is like these curves, I probably could have pushed them up into each other a little bit to save space. Because when it unwrapped it was way below because it kind of uses like a box and tries to keep them separately. That's if you auto unwrap them or whatever. You guys will see when you do it.
They're probably wondering, why is it important to save space and everything else?
Oh yeah, so saving space. You want as much of your UV map as possible to be taken up by faces. And the reason is your image, when you take it, say it's like 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, it's gonna be 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, and it's gonna have those pixels being used up whether there's a face there or not. So if you say you have 1,000 by 1,000 pixel texture and all you're unwrapping is a simple circle and it takes up a tiny spot in the corner, doesn't matter how high you make the resolution of that image, it's still going to be super blocky and pixelated on that one thing. So you want to take up as much space as you can to take advantage of resolution. And depending on if you're doing a game or animation, might depend on how much resolution you want to use. But for like games, you have to be super efficient with it because like I've seen games that are like AAA games that just come out like last year and like you could see the pixels on the character's hand because it was just bad UV unwrapping. They had inefficient space. So like the hand was like super small. So one thing actually to be careful of when you're doing the UV unwrapping, focus more on moving them around to fit together, not scaling them. Because one thing the programs will do is keep it at an even scale. So if the triangle on this part is this big, it keeps it that big. And if the circle's way bigger, the circle on your UV map is going to be way bigger, right? You want to keep it scaled because if you make the circle super small, the triangle super big, the triangle's going to be all high resolution and the circle's going to be like way blocky. So another tip when you're UV unwrapping. I don't know.
It will make a lot more sense when you guys do it.
Yeah, it will.
That's
It's really hard to do
right.
this without like demo.
Yeah, you just give them more of an introduction, and then when I do
Yeah.
the hands-on, I'll tell them all that
Yeah,
stuff.
and I'll be able to play around with it, show you guys if you guys want to see at least just simple UV unwraps. It's super fast to do. So why bother with all that? It's for texture painting. It's fun stuff. This is my favorite thing of all the modeling out there. So I'm going to use the term 3D painting a lot. There's actually no such thing as 3D painting, which is what I explained to you guys. Everything is a 2D image, right? That's why we're unwrapping it. So when you 3D paint on something, if you have like a brush on the 3D object, when you paint a face, it's going to say, okay, well, what are the coordinates of that face in the UV map? Okay, we're going to edit the picture in that location. So it's one thing to think about. The only reason I'm mentioning it is like sometimes you'll paint across and like the pixels will get jagged and like not evenly line up. It's just because you have a seam there or something. Like that's all it is remember that you're painting on a 2D thing. So the good news is because everything actually being painted is a 2D texture, you could flex between 2D and 3D painting programs. So you could do Substance Painter, like is one of the things I mentioned. That's like a really good 3D program. Maya and Blender both have internal 3D painting. It's a little bit trickier to use. It's less automatic. That's why I recommend starting with something that's kind of automatic and sets everything up for you. And then you could pull it out into Photoshop. You could add something and then you could put it back into the 3D program. And there's advantages to both. So I think Photoshop is a prereq for all of you guys and something probably most of you are familiar with. It's really easy to add stuff on Photoshop to a texture. So specific details like words are super easy to add in like Photoshop, right? You just put the words in. Whereas like painting them on in Substance Painter might be difficult, or like certain designs, like if you have like a drawing tablet, it might be easier on Photoshop than it is in like 3D model. But there's the advantages to 3D painting.
Now let me stop you a second. When he talks about words, is let's say you have a character and you want to, he has a drawing in there, but you want to put a word on his shirt that says, I'm rad. That's what he's talking about. That you can go in Photoshop and type on rad and then reattach that shell to your model, or rewrap it to your model, and now all of a sudden it has text on his shirt. That's
so yeah, another example is like, say, I think you guys modeled a soda can, right? Was that
it was one of the tutorials, and
yeah,
it was up to them if they wanted that or a model in Bishop or whatever else.
Yeah, so if you're doing that and like you're thinking of like making, say, the Pepsi logo, it's a lot easier to probably do the Pepsi logo in Photoshop than it is to like you paint and as it goes around the brush location is going to change stuff. But that's not to say 3D programming is not useful. It's probably more useful in the long run but you should use both. So first thing is instant visualization. If you paint a mark on a 3D model, you know exactly what it's going to look like on that 3D model. If you put a yellow spot on a car, you know where it is on the car. Whereas on Photoshop, depending on how complicated your UV map is, you got to guess, be like, okay, well, this is the door of the car, so if I put it right there, it'll pop up. So it depends on like how complicated your UV is usually, but you do get instant visualization, so that means that you can accurately place details. If you want to put a screw in the corner of a metal plate, you know exactly where to pop it, even if there's no change in material, even if it looks uniform throughout the thing. 3D rendering, so output versus input. When I talk about materials, it'll go more into what a texture actually is, but when you're painting something in Photoshop, all you're painting is an input for it to wrap around the model and do all of its other stuff. And sometimes if it's a height map, it's going to be black and white. It's not going to look like height, which we'll go into all that later. But 3D painting, you're looking at the actual output. You're looking at what is going to be modeled and what's going to render right there. Especially in Substance Painter, where it renders it real time. In Maya and Blender, you have to do some, I think, does it have real-time rendering in Maya? Kind of.
But
Does.
their entire software, like, you know,
Yeah.
Mudbox and
Yeah.
ZBrush, that do 3D painting, because Maya doesn't do it that well.
Yeah,
That's
neither
all I'm
does
saying.
Blender.
Neither does Blender. So that's kind of, to be honest, the 3D painting is a bit of a different world. It means we don't necessarily, I'll show you how you do it in Maya, but you probably won't. But anyway.
Yeah, that's why I'm just going to throw you guys something extra, like a link to Substance Painter stuff, if you
It's
do
nice
want to
to
paint
know,
it.
actually.
It's really good to know, and it helps you learn texturing. So I actually learned all this by learning Substance Painter and going back and being like, oh, that's what this meant in Maya or Blender.
And by the way, Substance Painter is free and has a 45-minute tutorial.
It's free for students,
Yeah,
so get it while you can, and that lasts for a year. And yeah, I'm going to link a 45-minute tutorial. You watch it, you'll be an expert, especially if you know Photoshop, and you'll be able to do more than anything you'll need to do, at least beyond the scope of the class. You'll be like set, right? Geometry as a reference, like kind of been going with what I'm saying about 3D visualization, and there's no need to reorganize your UV map if you're going only in 3D painting. So if you make a UV map, you can just hit auto unwrap, and because you're not trying to like look at, oh, what's the shape of the door going to be, you can just auto unwrap it, export it to Substance Painter, or paint it right there, and export it without ever seeing the UV map, if you want it.
Pretty sweet, I guess.
It's fun. There's
Knowing how
some...
Maya has some glitches in that UV
Yeah.
unwrapping, but anyway.
Yeah, so if you guys wanted to use Substance Painter and import the images back, you could just unwrap it and never touch it again. And then you guys have used Photoshop, so you're familiar with layers. That's actually probably one of the biggest features of texture painting, is painting stuff in layers. So most materials have multiple layers. For example, a yellow stripe on green paint on a metal base of a car, right? That's got 3 layers to it. Even though we look at it and we only see one color each, we see just the yellow, right? It's important. So here's one of an older model I had that kind of demonstrated that. We had a pink stripe on blue paint on a metal base, right? Why did I keep it? Why not just paint it on one thing where I just paint metal next to blue? Is if we keep it in layers, we can go back and edit it later. So it's kind of hard to see, but like I scratched away the paint there, and I put wear and tear on the edges where it's like showing metal underneath and stuff like that from where the paint chips away and stuff. So really how you want to start, especially at your guys' level, is just solid images that are just on top of each other, and you just choose where is it going to show what image. It's like, have you guys heard of, you guys have used masks in Photoshop? You guys go over that in your Photoshop?
I
Yes.
teach it, yeah.
So if you guys know masks, that's all it is. You're painting masks for solid, would be a solid pink image, a solid blue image, and a solid metal image.
Each of which has a mask attached.
Yeah, so the mask.
So that you see only where the pink needs to show up. Yes.
Yeah, and I'll like show an example. So say we have a metal cube. I've already unwrapped it. You guys have seen how a metal cube's unwrapped. It's the same if it's a beveled cube. Here's our bottom layer. It's going to be metal. On top of that, it's just going to be paint. Let's say we add a paint on top, and you guys have gone and you guys are going to do notes when you do that.
Yeah, we
So-
actually, Maya is all notes.
Yeah, well, it's the same in Blender. So in Substance Painter, it is layers like Photoshop. In Blender and in Maya, what I'm basically saying is it's not necessarily a mask right now. I'm basically saying show both layers at the same time, but show 100% paint and 0% metal. But then we paint a mask. So say we want to add wear and tear, because at the corner of a cube, it's going to chip off the paint as it gets worn out, right? So
And in the mask, by the way, just like in Photoshop, white means visible, black means
Yeah.
non-visible. So remember, the black and white is the key, just like it is in Photoshop.
Yes, and it's actually grayscale too. So
Yeah,
you can, if
that's
you want to
true.
have, you're not going to have like semi-transparent paint, but there are some cases where you can use grayscale. So I just start painting this, and I just paint black on white. So this is white, and we plug it in a node where I say, instead of just saying 100% paint and 0% metal, I say, if there's white, we're going to show 100% paint and 0% metal. If it's black, we're going to show 100% metal and 0% paint. And it comes out like that. One of the things I was talking about is the difference between Maya and Substance Painter is I had to render this. Substance Painter, you won't see the black and white. You'll see it actually chipping away the paint live. So that is another kind of cool thing. But it's very important that you keep the masks like that, because then you can do this. Then you can decide, you know what, I don't like the color of it as red, but I don't want to repaint all the metal on and like repaint metal onto a white surface. You just change the color of the paint to white. And because you have masks and you're using fill images, you can just change it at will. You could change the color of the metal to gold and the color of the paint to blue. So I'm taking up a lot of time here. So other mask uses is you can apply it to other layers. So I'll talk about height maps a little bit later, but basically it's black is low, white is high, anything gray in between is different heights, and it can imitate with light tricks basically the height. So
And they call these bump map in Maya.
yeah, bump maps. It'll be normal
Maps.
height maps. Yeah, I'll go over all those
We'll talk
in
about
materials section, but because paint has a thickness, right? So we want to show that. If this is going to be like a thick industrial paint on a metal crate, then we're going to show that. So rather than repaint the height map again, I can just use the same exact mask that I used right now. And maybe I want to say that, well, the metal is going to be rougher than the paint. Well, I could use the mask and just put a roughness map in it and show that it's roughness, and so on and so forth. So always paint in layers if you're going to do that. It's the way you guys, sounds like you guys do that anyway. Other uses, if you wanted to, so I just made a black and white image that just said fragile and put a logo on it, and I used that as a mask to a new layer of paint that was yellow, and it came up as that. This is another advantage of being able to visualize 3D when I say accurate placement of stuff. So I looked at my UV map, I saw that that side of the box was on the top center of my UV map, so I'm like, oh, I'll put fragile there. I didn't see that it was upside down. So I left that in there as an example of sometimes it's useful to hand paint on and see where it's actually going, as opposed to painting it in 2D and pulling it up and realizing, uh-oh, I did something wrong. So there are advantages to both, and that's an example. So last section is materials, which is why we texture paint. So why we UV unwrap is so we can texture paint. Why we texture paint is so we can make materials. Materials are a lot of stuff. So I've been talking about masks and all that stuff, and how we take several different images and compile them all into one image. So for this mech I have here, here are all my images. I've got all the different colors and the height maps and all that stuff. Don't worry about actually separating out which is which, but the key is that we do need to like plug them in together and like figure out what goes into what, which is what I did here. So this is what you guys get to do, and it's actually super fun. I don't know how many nodes you guys use, but anyways, what is a material?
It depends on the model.
Yeah, it depends on the model.
And what we need to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually just exporting my images from Substance Painter and getting them to work in Blender. That's what those nodes are. But basically, if you guys use a ray tracing renderer, it's going to take a light ray and that's going to hit an object and it's going to say what happens at this object. And it's not just color. It's not like if you're painting in Photoshop and you're just painting like you want to do a mirror, so you're like, oh, well, what's it reflecting off of? I'll paint that blue. It's, you know, what colors are absorbed into it? What colors reflect back? Is it reflective like a mirror? Does it emit light? Is it transparent? Does light reflect or refract?
And how does it reflect?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it can
What
be
should I
calculated 3 or 4 different ways in Maya. So anyway.
Yeah, and that's what, if you guys see when you go into rendering, just in case you guys are curious, when you choose your samples, that's basically how many samples it does per pixel of, here's like a kind of random generator of where it might refract and all that stuff. So basically the more samples you do, the more accurate the render is and the longer it takes, and you wait 2 hours for your frame to render. Also, it can do how the surface is shaped, which I'll show you after. So the simple one is the first 2 you really got to pay attention to, because that's like the basis for learning most of this basic stuff, is probably what you think of when you say, I'm going to color something. It's the diffuse. And basically it says, when light hits it, what happens? Just in the general terms of colors. So I give it a red diffuse, and it says when light hits it, it's going to show light red where there's a lot of light, and dark red where there's not a lot of light, and medium red in the middle. It's got, the only inputs it has is just what color is it, and is it rough or not. It's hard to show roughness with just diffuse. And then the other really important one is your glossy node. What is the node called, Maya? Is it glossy or specular? It's specular. So in terms of exporting maps, specular is the color of the glossy node, so which I'll show in a sec, but this is basically the opposite. This is the mirror, right? So if you can look at this is just like, it almost looks like a metal. Just like diffuse, it's got a color input and it's got roughness, and this one I can actually show roughness. So you can see this is a perfectly clean reflection, and then this is like, it looks like a brushed metal almost.
So
To give
you a parallel in Maya is if you wanted to do it rough, like in the prior slide, you would use a material called Blinn or Lambert. Those two materials tend to kind of absorb light. Versus if you wanted to do it shiny, you would use for this one that is less shiny a Fong, and for the other one a Fong E. So obviously you have different materials that react differently to light, so that also matters. So you also have to pick the right material on top of everything else, and specifying the diffusion, the reflection, and everything else.
Yeah. So as we go, by the way, that is not my model. That is Suzanne. That is the mascot of Blender. So if you ever want to test with materials, it's a really good model to use because you just put it in like inserting a cube, and it shows all the bends. So why we combine these? So you combine them for basically most basic materials, like we're not talking about glass and lights and all that kind of stuff. So this is actually something I only learned recently, and once it clicked and I started applying it, everything looked way cleaner. And I'll show you a visual example after. But you've got, for the most part, non-metals and metals. And by non-metals, I mean like especially like plastics and stuff is like a really good example to use. So if you look at a non-metal, the color of it, let's say I have this mouse pad, the diffuse of this is going to be green. The specular is going to be white. It's different from metals. For metals, your color actually comes from the specular. So for gold, let's say, the diffuse is black and the specular is like a yellowy orange, right? So that's like, if you're going to take anything away from the material section of this, just take that away for you to start getting on it. And then you mix them basically. And you could say like, oh, if it's a metal, it's probably going to be mostly the specular. If it's going to be a non-metal, you're going to use mostly plastic. I think in the example I have below, like here I have plastic and it's like 30% diffuse and like, or sorry, 70% diffuse and like 30% plastic. So here we have, just to reiterate, red diffuse, white specular. This is black diffuse, yellow specular. So that's how you make metals versus non-metals, which is probably what you guys are mostly going to work with. For the most part, just because it's simple and it's quick to render. Once you throw in other stuff.
I love wood too. A lot of students get wood, want to achieve wood that is not easy to do within Maya actually. Maya has a pretty lame old wood. There is one texture that says wood, but it's really not very good.
Well, the wood that I had in that one ship that I had was actually just Substance Painter's internal wood, which is pretty decent. But so wood, you still would do this. So for example, for wood, it would be on this end with it wouldn't be a brown diffuse, it would be wood, like as the image is the diffuse. So it's saying over here it might be darker brown and over here it might be lighter brown. And that's where the image comes in to a material. So basically you plug your image into the color. So instead of it being one solid color, it's an image. And then it would still be a white specular. And you can increase, so how he says you mix the diffuse and the glossy, or the diffuse and the specular. If you increase the specular, or how much of the mix is leaning towards the specular side, you'll actually get shinier wood. So like hardwood floors that are actually got the gloss over them.
Varnish on.
Yeah. Versus like actually these two doors are even pretty different. Like that one's a lot more diffuse focused. That one seems a little bit glossier. So you can actually play with it and do more than just the color of wood. You see how it reflects and stuff like that.
But
and
you
then,
use basically a JPEG image.
Yeah.
To play
It's just a solid image that you throw in.
Because actually Maya has a wood that does not use an image, and we will play with it next class, and it's not very good wood. It means the outcome is pretty more, even though you can change the spacing of the grain and this and that. But anyway, we'll do a little demo on that too.
Actually, I think Blender has the same thing. It's like awful. It's just like stripes basically.
Same for Maya,
It's so terrible. It's not worth using. So other fun ones. This is my favorite, I think, material is emission because I like painting like futuristic robot-y kind of stuff, and this just makes it look cool. So it has two purposes. First is self-lighting, and this is, if you guys are making scenes, will actually be really important. So let's say you have like a city and you want to have clouds in the background, but you don't want to like model clouds or paint a picture. You actually just go outside and take a picture of clouds and import it as a plane with like clouds as the texture. You give it like an emission value of 1, and it doesn't have shadows cast on it, so you're not going to have like a cloud with the shadow of a building cast up against it. But it also doesn't like cast a bunch of light onto the scene. So it's for when you want something to just render in the background as is, self-lighting. And then the other end is lighting the scene. So depending on what rendering engine you're using, you'll light your scene with emission. So these glowing eyes that I have, like they could actually light up a whole room if I set the emission value high enough. One thing I wanted to put is if you guys do any post-processing, this always looks better with glare added. So if you guys can do that in Photoshop or whatever, it looks like crap without glare. It just looks like a solid, whatever color, white or purple you have. Height maps. So I talked about that earlier. Basically, on a scale of black to white, it shows the altitude, and then it calculates. It basically calculates how the lighting will look. So it says, all right, well, the paint is higher up in the metal, and light's coming this way, so it's probably going to shine along this edge here, right? It's critical for if you want anything to look realistic, and it's also really good for adding details. So I had those screws that I added in the beginning to the texture. That's all just me playing with the height map and just saying like, oh, I'm going to make it lower where the screw's drilled in, and then make a white dot in the middle where the screw is pulled out, and then make a black line to show like where you screw the screw in, like where you put the screwdriver in, right?
To keep it even simple, we can do it in next class, is you create a plane, you attach to that plane a map that you built in Photoshop by going in Photoshop and making black and white like random, like crazy. And you assign it, and all of a sudden that plane starts having, becoming, hills and mountains, in quote. So, so
that's for the height. And it's best, this one is best used for small height changes, like paint, for example, or even a screw, like you can get away with it. There's basically a limit because there's like, it's only going to calculate so much height. Oh, and I have some more examples. So yes, I changed the color from gold, but other than that, all this metal plating is just playing with the height map. So I took a height brush, I changed it to black, and just swept. And then I shrunk it a little, changed it to white, and swept back, and you get this crease going along. And it looks really cool.
And it's geometry-wise, it's no extra geometry. That is the best part.
Yeah, all of these are flat images.
So when you're rendering that image, it's not going to take you 3 times longer because you have all these extra dents and ridges. I think that the reason why I'm happy that Danny's here, because you guys are modeling right now. And I want you to be aware, if you're modeling for the video game team or for your own, that you don't have to have these million details, because you can do it just through maps, just like Danny is showing. So that's kind of really pretty awesome.
Yeah, and one of the guys that I was talking to in industry, even when it comes to the height map, I was like, well, how much detail I put? Because some of these people in their demo reels got like really, really detailed stuff. And rule of thumb that he said is never, ever do a detail that's going to be smaller than a pixel, even then a few pixels, because, and that's taking into account like your camera. So if your character's going to be far away, you don't have to put as much detail. But if they're going to be close up and you don't want to add a bunch of mesh geometry, that's the way to do it. It's with height maps. Or similar is displacement maps, but they have a different effect. So it's like a height map, same thing where black to white tells altitude, but it actually moves the vertices. So it actually displaces them, and so if it's white, it's going to pull them up, and if it's black, it's going to push them down. Because of this, it requires a high poly count, because you're going to have to like actually, you'll see when I do it later, you're going to have to, if it's too detailed, you're going to have a lot of polygons to move. It's really good for stuff like landscapes. So like she was saying, like you make hills and stuff from height map. There's actually, if any of you guys are interested in scenery or landscapes, or you're doing mountains or anything like that, you should write down this website, terrain.party. And it's silly. I'll show you why. I'll show you an example in a sec.
Yeah, we'll post this.
Yeah, and I'll post it too. So here's an example of displacement map at work. This is divided a lot. This is like 20,000 squares in this square, and so that I can get smoothing. Because if it was only like 20 squares, it's going to be all jagged, right? But here's the displacement map. I just clicked a brush in GIMP.
Now, when he talks about square, he talks about faces. Has a lot of faces in there. Otherwise, it would kind of look like the equivalent of pixelated in Photoshop, like a lot of steps.
Yeah, and I have maybe an example I can show if we have time, like later, of what you can actually do it on purpose to be low poly if you're going for like a certain art style.
It's actually style now.
Yeah, it's cool. It's for mobile. If you're going mobile stuff, they love doing that. So this is a really boring one. I could have gone with like a really cool mountain or something, which I have. I've done like Mount Rainier and Washington or whatever. But so this is basically the website that I gave you guys. You go to it and you have the whole world in front of you, and you just click somewhere on the map and you draw a square. It doesn't matter how big it is, and it gives you the height data from people recording all the altitude data. and exports it to you as a displacement map, as a black and white map.
So San Luis Obispo or Cal Poly campus, can you do that, you think?
This is San Luis Obispo.
All right.
That's why I picked it. Even though it's like not that cool, I was like, this is the height data. And then you put it in and you can adjust the height so you can make those mountains really jagged. But right here, if you can see where it's super jagged, this is why you have to have high poly counts. Because like one face is not going to be able to cover that all and do all that detail. So if you guys are ever interested and you want to quickly make terrain, terrain.party, and you can just highlight somewhere that you like. So back to materials. So glass is pretty self-explanatory. Do you guys have a glass node specifically?
Maya has one, yes, absolutely.
All right.
We'll play with glass.
Good. Yeah, it's a good one because at first, like depending on the rendering engine, you have to like do all the reflection and refraction manually. It's exactly what glass does. It refracts and reflects light. The cool thing is you could also use it for liquids. So when you use the node, all you're putting in really is the index of refraction, and I guess the color, like I made that green. And so you guys ever take like a physics or optics class, it's just refraction is when the light beam comes in and there's something with a different IOR and it causes it to bend in a more exaggerated or a less exaggerated way. So that's why if you like look through glass in a certain way, it makes things look bigger or smaller. That's what this does. And you can actually, when you want to make a material look perfect and actually physically realistic, you just look up that object's index of refraction, and that's it. So glass, like there's tables. If you look up like index of refraction table, it's going to pull it up. And any material that you ever want, you're just going to be there. You put it in, and you get physically accurate glass. Or like glass is like 1.4, water's 1.33, diamond's 2.7. You get like throw in random number, and you get perfect refraction. Translucent. So I can actually pull this model up if we can get it running on my computer, but it's similar to subsurface scattering, which I actually like better. And that it's this glow here is what I'm going for. So inside this blue box is a small white box with a very high emission value. And then what I did is I put a blue box around it, and I said, make it translucent. It's got a little blue emission, but it's mostly make it translucent. And so what it's going to do is when light comes through the translucent material, it's going to kind of spread out and smooth out and look soft. A really good example is curtains over a window. So if you take a really thin, big curtain over a small window, you're going to see the light from that window through the curtain, right? But you're not going to see it as like a rigid square of like the light window. It's going to kind of like be soft and like fluffy, you know, as like the light's going to kind of spread out. That's what translucent does. You don't have to put it inside your mesh to make that effect. That's just the example that I use translucent in. And then subsurface is very similar, and I can actually show that. So, and then the last one of my favorites is cartoon. So for some of you that are going for stylized work, it's just threshold.
And in Maya, it's called vector renderer.
Is it
so
vector?
It's a vector renderer. Pretty much, it renders like that.
Yeah. So
and
it's
you can
just
choose
a
if you
threshold.
want just the outlines or if you want it in a toon format. But
Yeah. So as I understand it, I think it's just a threshold of if it's going to be this bright, we make it this bright, and if not, it's darker. So that's how you get like not a gradient, but like just the 3 different colors.
And it's like
And-
posterized in Photoshop. You remember you choose a threshold. Do you know in Photoshop there is a
Yeah.
posterize? And you choose a threshold and it'll give you that.
Yeah.
result.
I think you can also like soften this stuff too. So there's other there's other options, but you can like soften the edges and make them bigger so it's like not quite rigid, I guess.
But that's what you might want to shoot for. Like when you want when you do posterize, you want exactly this result. Now, does anybody have questions? Ellie has a question.
What's that?
So, if you do the vector render, is that like where you would, if you wanted more of like a geometric sort of like hard lines instead of smooth lines?
Yeah, actually, when we
More
switch to
or
my
less
computer, I could show you an example because I know exactly because we talked earlier about that.
Right.
I could show it in my other thing. I think that's it. So programs, if you guys want to check out more stuff, you guys are already learning Maya. Blender has a setting in it that changes all of Blender's hotkeys to Maya hotkeys. If you want to learn it, it's just free. It's got a lot of other things. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. So that's what I use. And then Substance Painter, I highly recommend while you guys are still students, you at least look at it, especially if you're going to make static models and you want to like have a really cool render without putting a lot of work in. It's going to be good because it'll render it right in there real time. And so I have like a lot of the images I use in here were rendered in Blender. And I think that might be it.